My boyfriend was a freeloader and he had the nerve to use my card to buy a ring for another woman, but what happened next made him pay dearly. 3 years of my life went down the drain, and I'm left with a financial mess to clean up. Honestly, I need to get this off my chest before I explode. I met Kenny during what should have been a boring day. I was taking the Amtrak to visit my sister in Chicago when our train hit something on the tracks. It wasn't a full derailment, but it was enough to damage the undercarriage and strand us all in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania. They had to bus everyone to this tiny town to wait while they figured out the logistics. 8 hours. That's how long we were stuck in this random town with exactly one diner, one bar, and a convenience store. Most passengers crowded into the diner, but it filled up fast. I ended up at the bar next door with my overnight bag, ordering whatever sad sandwich they had and scrolling through my phone to let my sister know I'd be late. Kenny was sitting 2 stools down, also with luggage. He made some joke about how the universe must really want us to appreciate small-town America. I laughed. He was cute, tall, with messy dark blonde hair and nice hands. I've always been a sucker for nice hands. I don't know why. We got to talking and found out we were both heading to the same general area. He was interviewing for some position. He said he was sick of the corporate grind and wanted to build something meaningful. I told him I worked in logistics. It's not glamorous, but it's stable. After a few hours of talking and a couple of beers, we exchanged numbers. I didn't think much would come of it, to be honest. But he texted the next day, and we met up for coffee when I got back from my sister's. That interview he was going to? He didn't get the job. But he had another one lined up, he said, and another after that. There was always something big on the horizon, always almost landing the perfect opportunity. I didn't mind at first. The job market sucks, and he was charming. 6 months in, his lease was ending. My place was bigger, closer to downtown, and honestly, I was already paying for most of our date nights anyway since his funds were temporarily tight until he landed his next gig. When he suggested moving in together, it seemed logical. This is where things started shifting. The first month, he paid his share of rent on time. By month 2, he was a week late. By month 3, he had this whole story about how a check from a freelance project was delayed, but he'd definitely cover next month's rent, plus what he owed. I didn't push it. I could handle the rent on my own. It was tight, but doable. And Kenny was home all day, networking and building his portfolio, so at least the apartment was clean, and dinner was usually ready when I got home. I told myself it was temporary. The excuses got more elaborate. The startup he was consulting for had accounting issues. A client was late paying an invoice. The project timeline got extended. It was always something just beyond his control, always with a solution just around the corner. Meanwhile, my bank account was getting thinner. I started taking on extra shifts and picked up some weekend inventory work. Kenny would give me these back rubs when I came home exhausted. He'd tell me how amazing I was, how he'd make it up to me when his career took off. My friend Jay was the first to say something. We were grabbing coffee and I mentioned skipping an upcoming concert because money was tight. She gave me this look and asked how long I was planning to bankroll Kenny's lifestyle. I got defensive, said we were a team, that relationships have ups and downs, that he'd do the same for me, but the comment stuck with me. I started paying more attention. I noticed how often he used my Visa for small things without asking, how my grocery bill had doubled since he moved in. But my fridge seemed emptier. He always had money for a new game or drinks with his friends, but never for bills. When I brought up marriage once, just casually after my cousin got engaged, he looked like I'd suggested we jump off a bridge. He said he wasn't ready, that marriage was serious business, that we had a good thing going. Why rush? I didn't press it. I should have. Then things got weirdly better for about a month. Kenny started going out more. He said he was meeting with potential clients, attending networking events, catching up with old contacts. He seemed energized. He said things were finally coming together. I wanted to believe him. That Friday, my friend M texted me, asking if we wanted to grab dinner with her and her boyfriend. Kenny had already told me he had a networking thing, so I agreed to meet them alone. I got to the restaurant early. M was acting strange, kept checking her phone, giving me these weird sympathetic looks. Finally, her boyfriend arrived and immediately started talking about some tech event he'd been to the night before. And then he said it. He asked if Kenny had enjoyed the open bar, mentioned seeing him there with his fiancée. I must have looked confused because they all got quiet. Em took out her phone, started apologizing, saying she wasn't sure if she should show me or not, but she'd seen something on Instagram that morning that didn't make sense. She handed me her phone. It was some woman's profile I didn't recognize, a blonde named Daria. Her most recent post was from the night before, string lights, champagne glasses, and her hand with a diamond ring. The caption read, "I said yes. Can't believe I get to marry my soulmate." I scrolled through her profile. There were posts of them going back at least a month, captions about my man and date night with the love of my life. In one, they were at the beach from 2 weekends before, when Kenny had told me he was visiting his parents upstate. I excused myself from dinner, told M and R I'd call them later. I went straight home and checked our shared credit card account on my phone. I found charges for restaurants I'd never been to, a hotel downtown from 3 weeks ago, and a jewelry store charge from last week for $2,800. That's when it hit me. He'd bought her ring with my money. I sat by the window in our apartment, scrolling through all the evidence until it got dark. Around 9 o'clock, I heard his key in the lock. He came in, kicked off his shoes like it was any other night, went straight to the fridge and pulled out a beer that I'd paid for. I asked him where he'd been. "Just networking," he said, "making connections. Things are looking up." Then I asked if he'd gotten engaged recently. You should have seen his face. First shock, then this weird smirk, like he was almost impressed I'd found out. When I asked if he'd proposed to that blonde girl from the photos, he just shrugged. He said something like, "Look, can we not do this now? I don't owe you anything." I was shaking. "You spent my money, lived with me, and proposed to someone else," I screamed, loud enough that I'm sure the neighbors heard. And that's when he said it. The thing I can't get out of my head. He rolled his eyes, took a swig of beer, and said, "Come on, you really thought I'd give you a ring? You're the kind of girl men settle for when they fail." I didn't fail. I don't remember consciously deciding to hit him, but suddenly my fist connected with his chest, hard. He stumbled back, spilling beer on his shirt. Before he could recover, I slapped him across the face, leaving a red mark on his cheek. I told him to get out, to pack his stuff and leave. He tried to argue, said I was overreacting. I grabbed his backpack from the hook by the door and started shoving whatever I could reach into it. His charger from the counter, some t-shirts from the clean laundry pile. I threw it at him and told him if he wasn't gone in 5 minutes, I'd call his new fiancée and tell her everything. That got him moving. He grabbed some essentials, mumbling about coming back for the rest later. I told him to coordinate with the landlord because I wouldn't be letting him in again. He slammed the door on his way out. I changed the locks the next day, put his remaining stuff in trash bags by the dumpster, blocked his number, his email, his social media. But the nightmare wasn't over. When I checked my accounts more carefully, I realized how bad the damage was. Over $2,700 charged to my cards in just the last 2 months, subscriptions I never approved, restaurant tabs that would make you sick, and the ring, that ring that wasn't even for me. I called the bank, but most charges were too old to dispute. They were made with a card he was authorized to use after all. I'd been so stupid. That was 3 months ago. What's happened since then is a whole other nightmare that I'll save for my next post. First of all, thank you for all the comments and messages on my last post. I honestly didn't expect so many people to care about my train wreck of a life, but here we are. A lot of you asked what happened after I kicked Kenny out, so grab your popcorn because this is where everything really went to hell. The night after I threw Kenny out, I couldn't sleep. I kept checking the door even though I'd deadbolted it. Around 3 in the morning, I got a string of texts from him that ranged from angry, "How dare I embarrass him by putting his stuff outside," to manipulative, "We need to talk about this like adults," to pathetic, "I have nowhere to go." I didn't respond to any of them. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I needed a day to process and figure out exactly how screwed I was financially. I made a cup of coffee and sat down with all my bank statements, credit card bills, and a notebook. What I found made me literally gag on my coffee. It wasn't just the $1,700 I'd initially noticed. Going back further, I found small withdrawals, random purchases, subscription services I didn't recognize. He'd been slowly bleeding me dry for months. The total damage was closer to $5,400. That's $5,400 on top of the rent I'd been covering, on top of the groceries, on top of the utilities. I called the credit card company again, this time armed with a detailed list. The customer service rep was sympathetic but firm. Most charges were too old to dispute, and Kenny had been an authorized user. The best they could do was remove him from the account and flag any pending charges. They suggested I file a police report if I wanted to pursue it further. I thought about it, genuinely considered it, but the idea of dragging this out, of having to see Kenny again in some courtroom, of having to prove he'd spent my money without permission when technically I'd given him access, it was too much. I decided to just eat the loss and focus on getting my life back together. That afternoon, I called the locksmith to change the locks. It cost $170 I definitely couldn't afford. But the thought of Kenny coming back with his key was worse than the hit to my already maxed out card. While the locksmith worked, I gathered all of Kenny's remaining stuff and shoved it into garbage bags. His clothes, his stupid protein powder that had been taking up half my cabinet space. I texted him once, telling him his things would be by the dumpster for 24 hours and after that, they were going to Goodwill. He showed up when I was dragging the last bag out, perfect timing as always. He looked unshaven, wearing the same clothes from the night before. I wondered briefly where he'd slept, then reminded myself it wasn't my problem anymore. He tried to talk to me, saying there were things I didn't understand, that Daria wasn't what I thought, that he'd been planning to break it off with her. I just kept walking past him with the bags. When he grabbed my arm to stop me, I yanked away so hard I scraped my elbow on the brick wall. I told him if he touched me again, I'd call the cops. That shut him up, but I could feel him watching me as I went back inside. The locksmith finished 20 minutes later, handed me my new keys, and I finally felt like I could breathe in my own apartment again. The next week at work was a blur. I was exhausted, jumping every time my phone buzzed and making stupid mistakes that my supervisor kept pointing out. By Friday, I caught up on some missed deadlines, but I was running on empty. My friend Jay invited me out for drinks, saying I needed to rejoin the land of the living, but I couldn't afford it. I made up an excuse about being tired. The following Monday, I was called into my manager's office. I thought it was about the inventory report I'd screwed up the week before, but it was worse, much worse. They were restructuring. My position was being eliminated. They gave me 2 weeks' notice and an insulting severance package that wouldn't even cover next month's rent. I didn't cry in the office. I nodded, signed the papers, and walked back to my desk like everything was normal. Then, I locked myself in the bathroom stall and had a silent panic attack for 20 minutes. That night, I called my mom. We're not super close. She lives in Florida with her second husband, and we talk maybe once a month, but I needed to hear a parent tell me things would be okay. She was sympathetic but not exactly helpful. She said I should never have let Kenny move in without putting a ring on it first. She asked if I'd considered moving back home until I got back on my feet. Moving back to Florida to sleep on my mom's pull-out couch and listen to my stepdad's political rants? Hard pass. I spent my 2 weeks' notice applying for every job I could find. I sent out 73 applications and got 6 responses, all requesting second-round interviews that never materialized. The rejection emails started filling my inbox by the day I cleaned out my desk. The first week of unemployment, I still had a routine: wake up, apply for jobs, make a cheap lunch, apply for more jobs, go for a walk to save on heating, make dinner, watch something on YouTube, sleep, repeat. By week 2, my bank account was down to 3 digits. I canceled Netflix, started taking shorter showers, and ate ramen and eggs for most meals. I called the electric company to work out a payment plan and called my landlord, promising the rent would be a few days late. He wasn't happy but said he'd wait until the 15th before charging a late fee. The 15th came and went. I sold my nice watch on eBay, sold some clothes on Poshmark, and listed my TV on Facebook Marketplace but got only lowball offers. Then my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was Kenny. He'd gotten a new phone or was using someone else's. He said he needed to talk to me, that Daria had found out about us and broken things off, that he was sorry and wanted to explain. I blocked that number too. But it rattled me, not because I cared about his problems, but because it reminded me how spectacularly I'd failed at judging character. I'd let this man into my life, into my home, given him access to my finances, and he'd seen me as nothing more than a convenience, a backup plan, someone to use. By the end of the month, I was desperate. My landlord had started leaving voicemail messages about the rent. My electricity had been shut off for 48 hours before I scraped together enough to pay the minimum to get it turned back on. I'd eaten nothing but plain rice for 3 days straight because it was all I had left. I finally swallowed my pride and applied for temporary assistance. The process was humiliating, filling out forms detailing every aspect of my financial life, waiting for hours in an overcrowded government office, being told I made too much at my previous job to qualify for immediate help. They gave me a list of food banks instead. The next day, I went to one, stood in line with my ID and proof of address, and accepted a box of canned goods and nearly expired bread with a smile that felt like it might crack my face. I carried it home on the bus, feeling like everyone was staring at me, even though nobody cared. That night, I got an email. It was from a small warehouse that needed temporary help during their busy season. The pay was less than half what I'd been making, but it was something. I replied immediately, had a phone interview the next morning, and started the following Monday. The work was physically brutal, 8 to 10 hours on my feet, lifting boxes, scanning inventory, working in either freezing cold or stifling heat, depending on which section of the warehouse I was assigned to. My hands developed calluses. My back ached constantly, and I came home too tired to even think about applying for better jobs. But I made enough to pay part of the rent. Not all of it, but my landlord agreed to another extension, as long as I paid the late fees. Then one evening, I came home to find an eviction notice taped to my door. Apparently my partial payments weren't cutting it anymore. I had 30 days to pay in full or vacate the premises. I sat on my kitchen floor and just stared at the paper, too numb to even cry. That's when my neighbor knocked. She'd seen the notice and heard me come in. She asked if I was okay. I wasn't, obviously, but I lied and said I was fine. She hesitated, then asked if I was looking for a roommate. Her cousin Rosalie needed a place to stay for a few months, while she saved up for her own apartment. If we split the rent 3 ways, it might work out for everyone. I'd never spoken more than 10 words to this neighbor before, but in that moment, she might as well have been an angel. I said yes immediately. Rosalie moved in 2 days later. She was quiet, paid her share up front in cash, and didn't ask questions about why I sometimes ate nothing but rice for dinner. We weren't friends exactly, but we coexisted peacefully in the increasingly depressing apartment. With Rosalie's contribution, I managed to pay off enough of the back rent to stop the eviction process. I was still drowning in credit card debt, still working a job that paid barely above minimum wage, still eating like a college student during finals week. But I wasn't homeless, and that counted for something. Then one day, about 3 months after I had kicked Kenny out, I was rushing to catch the bus to work when I collided with someone on the sidewalk. I stumbled back, mumbling an apology without looking up. Then I heard my name. It was Kenny, standing there like he'd been waiting for me. He was wearing a fast food uniform, the kind with the hideous polo shirt and visor. I tried to walk around him, but he stepped in my way. He said he'd been trying to reach me, that he needed to talk to me, that he'd made a huge mistake. I noticed his phone was an ancient model, not the latest iPhone he'd always had before. Karma's a jerk, I guess. I told him I was late for work and pushed past him. He called after me saying he'd come back, that he'd make things right. I didn't look back, just ran for the bus and made it just as the doors were closing. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I missed him or wanted him back, but because I was afraid he'd figured out where I lived, that he'd show up again. I wedged a chair under my bedroom doorknob, even though I knew it was paranoid. The next morning there was a letter in my mailbox. No stamp, just my name scrawled across the front. I recognized Kenny's handwriting immediately. I didn't open it, just tore it up and dropped the pieces into different trash cans on my way to the bus stop. But I knew he wouldn't give up that easily, and I was right. Thank you for all the supportive comments. Reading them during my bus rides to work has been one of the few bright spots lately. Some of you have asked for more details about what happened after Kenny started showing up again, so here goes nothing. After I tore up Kenny's letter, I thought maybe he'd get the hint. He didn't. For the next 2 weeks I'd spot him randomly, across the street from my apartment building, at the bus stop near work, once even at the laundromat where I'd started going because our building's machines were too expensive. He never approached me directly, just watched. Sometimes he'd wave or try to catch my eye. I'd pretend not to see him and walk faster. My temporary warehouse job turned into a nightmare pretty quickly. The managers kept extending shifts with zero notice, so I'd come in expecting to work 8 hours and end up staying for 12. My feet were constantly swollen, and I developed this sharp pain in my lower back that never really went away. But I couldn't afford to quit, so I just took whatever ibuprofen I could find in the apartment and kept going. Rosalie noticed. One night I came home and literally couldn't stand up straight. She was making some kind of soup and offered me a bowl. It was the first actual homemade food I'd had in weeks that wasn't plain rice or ramen. We sat at the kitchen table, and for the first time we actually talked. Turns out Rosalie had her own Kenny story. Different name, same jerk. It was weirdly comforting knowing I wasn't the only idiot who'd trusted the wrong person. We started having dinner together when our schedules aligned, just whatever we could cobble together from our sad pantry and the discount section at the grocery store. But it helped. Then one morning in late November, I woke up feeling like someone had hit me with a truck. My throat was on fire, my head was pounding, and I could barely get out of bed. I called work, croaking through an explanation. My supervisor sighed heavily and reminded me that temp workers don't get sick days. If I didn't come in, I might not have a position when I felt better. I dragged myself to the bathroom and took my temperature with an ancient thermometer I found in the medicine cabinet. 103.5 degrees. That couldn't be right. I shook the thermometer and tried again. 103.8 degrees. I should have gone to urgent care. I know that now. But urgent care costs money, and I had exactly $27 in my checking account to last until payday. So, I took more ibuprofen, bundled up in every layer I owned, and somehow made it to the bus. I don't remember much about that day. I scanned boxes, drank water from the fountain, and hid in the bathroom when the dizziness got too bad. Somehow, I made it to the end of my shift. I remember waiting for the bus home, shivering violently even though I was sweating through my clothes. Next thing I knew, I was on the ground. Someone was shaking me, asking if I was okay. It was a teenage girl, looking absolutely terrified. I'd apparently passed out at the bus stop. She helped me sit up and asked if she should call someone. I said no, I was fine, just tired. I wasn't fine at all. I made it onto the bus somehow, made it back to the apartment building, and made it up the 3 flights of stairs by basically crawling. Then I collapsed on the living room floor, still in my coat and boots. That's where Rosalie found me when she got home from her evening shift. She later told me she thought I was dead at first. I was so pale and barely breathing. She managed to get me into bed, forced me to drink water, and put cold washcloths on my forehead all night. By morning my fever had broken, but I felt like I'd been run over twice. Rosalie had already called my work, telling them I had pneumonia and wouldn't be in for at least 3 days. I tried to protest. We both knew I'd probably lose my job. But she shut me down immediately. She said no job was worth dying for, especially one that paid so little. She was right, but being right doesn't pay rent. I spent the next 2 days in bed, drifting in and out of sleep, worrying about money every time I was conscious enough to worry about anything. On the 3rd day, my phone rang. It was the warehouse. I expected to be fired, but instead, the HR person was calling to check on my pneumonia and let me know about their short-term disability policy. Apparently, Rosalie had not only called in sick for me, but had also marched down to the warehouse in person demanding to speak to someone about employee benefits. She'd raised enough hell that they'd actually looked into their own policies and found that even temp workers qualified for some basic protections. I got 5 paid sick days. 5, not enough to fully recover, but enough to avoid ending up back on the floor of a bus stop. When Rosalie got home that evening, I cried. Actually cried. It was the first time anyone had fought for me and I don't even know how long. When I went back to work, things were different. My supervisor kept giving me the side eye, probably waiting for me to collapse again. But my coworkers, people I'd barely spoken to before, kept checking on me, making sure I took breaks, offering to help with the heavier loads. Word had gotten around about the girl whose roommate raised hell with HR. Meanwhile, the Kenny situation took a new turn. The random sightings stopped, but the texts increased. He'd somehow gotten a new number again, or was borrowing phones, and would send these long, rambling messages about how much he missed me, how Daria had ruined his life, how he'd been thinking about where it all went wrong. I blocked each new number as it came, but it was exhausting. Jay suggested I change my number entirely, but that meant paying a fee I couldn't afford. So, I just kept blocking and ignoring. December rolled around, bringing even more financial stress. The warehouse was busier than ever with holiday orders, which meant more hours but also more physical strain. My back pain got so bad that I started taking the maximum dose of ibuprofen every day just to function. My teeth hurt constantly. A molar had been bothering me for months, but dental care might as well have been a luxury vacation to the Maldives for all I could afford it. One particularly cold morning, I was waiting for the bus, stamping my feet to keep warm, when an older woman next to me struck up a conversation. Just normal bus stop small talk about the weather, the late bus, typical stuff. Then she mentioned she worked at a medical office down the street. I nodded politely, not really paying attention, until she said something about their warehouse needing reorganization. I probably looked desperate because I immediately asked if they were hiring. She seemed surprised but gave me the office manager's name and suggested I drop by with my resume. I thanked her, not expecting much. Random bus stop connections rarely pan out, but I was desperate enough to try anything. The next day, I took a detour on my lunch break and walked into the medical office asking for the manager by name. I expected to be told to apply online or to leave my resume with the receptionist. Instead, I was ushered into a small office where a harried-looking woman was eating a sandwich at her desk. She glanced at my resume, asked about my background and logistics, and then jumped straight to when I could start organizing their supply area. It wasn't a full-time position, just 20 hours a week to start, handling medical supply inventory and deliveries, but it paid $3 more per hour than the warehouse. The hours were flexible, and it involved actual skills instead of just physical labor. I accepted on the spot. For the next few weeks, I worked both jobs, mornings at the medical office, evenings at the warehouse. It was brutal, but for the first time in months I could actually pay my bills on time. I'd come home exhausted, eat whatever Rosalie had made. She'd taken to cooking for both of us when she realized how much my health had deteriorated, and collapse into bed. By mid-January I'd saved enough to quit the warehouse job. My last day, I felt nothing but relief as I turned in my badge. My supervisor seemed genuinely surprised. I think they'd expected me to just keep tolerating the terrible conditions indefinitely. One of my coworkers gave me an awkward side hug and said she was happy I'd escaped. The medical office job wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. The office manager kept finding more hours for me as I proved myself reliable. By February, I was working 35 hours a week and had even been given a small desk in the back where I could track inventory on an ancient desktop computer. With regular paychecks coming in, I started tackling the mountain of debt Kenny had left me with. $20 here, $50 there. It wasn't much, but watching the balances slowly decrease gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in months. Rosalie and I settled into a comfortable routine. We weren't best friends or anything, but there was a mutual respect and understanding between us. She'd started dating someone new, a quiet guy, and sometimes he'd join us for dinner. It was nice to have someone else in the apartment who wasn't Kenny-shaped. Things were looking up, slowly. My back still hurt, my tooth still throbbed occasionally, but I was making it, one step at a time. Then came Valentine's Day. I'd been deliberately ignoring all the heart-shaped decorations in stores, the romantic commercials, the couples planning special evenings. Rosalie and her boyfriend were going out, so I had the apartment to myself. I'd planned a thrilling evening of frozen pizza and whatever was new on Netflix. I was halfway through my sad pizza when someone knocked on the door, not a normal knock, a persistent, almost desperate pounding. I froze, pizza slice halfway to my mouth. It had to be Kenny. No one else would be that dramatic. I tiptoed to the door and looked through the peephole. Sure enough, there he was, holding what looked like flowers in a small box. I backed away from the door, hoping he'd think no one was home. He knocked again, then called my name, said he knew I was in there, that he'd seen the light under the door, that he just wanted to talk, to explain, to make things right. I remained silent, my heart hammering in my chest. After what felt like forever, I heard him sigh. Something hit the floor outside. The flowers, I assume, and then footsteps walking away. When I was sure he was gone, I cracked the door open. There was a bouquet of grocery store roses on the floor, along with a small velvet box and a card. I should have just kicked it all back into the hallway and closed the door. But curiosity got the better of me. I picked up the box first. Inside was a ring. Not an engagement ring, but a simple silver band with a tiny stone that might have been a diamond but was probably cubic zirconia. The card said, "I know I can't undo what I did, but I want to start making it right. This is the ring I should have given you instead of her. I've changed. Please call me." I stood there in the doorway, looking at this pathetic attempt at redemption, and felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not even disgust, just emptiness. This man had wrecked my life and thought a cheap ring would fix it. I dropped the ring and card into the trash can by the elevator, left the flowers for anyone who might want them, went back to my apartment, locked the door, and finished my now cold pizza. The next morning, I woke up to a text from an unknown number. Kenny again, asking if I'd gotten his gift. I didn't block this one. Instead, I replied with 2 words, "Move on." Then I blocked that number too. February turned to March. The medical office continued to give me more responsibilities and hours. I paid off one of my smaller credit cards entirely. Rosalie and I repainted the living room on a Sunday afternoon, covering the dingy beige with a soft gray that made the whole apartment feel cleaner somehow. My mom called, surprised that I sounded more like myself. She even offered to help with my dental work if I'd come visit for a weekend. I was still hesitant. My stepdad and I had never gotten along, but the idea of finally addressing my aching tooth was tempting. And Kenny? He finally seemed to get the message. The texts stopped. The random appearances stopped. I occasionally checked Daria's Instagram and saw she'd moved on with someone new. Kenny's account had been dormant for months. I was rebuilding, slowly, painfully, but steadily. Not back to where I was before. I don't think I'll ever be that person again. But somewhere new, somewhere stronger, if more cautious. Life went on. My hours at the medical office increased to full-time with actual benefits. I finally got that aching tooth fixed during a weekend visit to my mom's. Rosalie and I renewed the lease on the apartment, even though she was spending most nights at her boyfriend's place by then. My credit score inched up. I started putting a little money aside each month for emergencies. I even went on a date or 2, though nothing serious. Trust doesn't come back easily once it's been shattered. Then last month, I got a text from Jay. She'd bumped into Kenny at a coffee shop. She said he'd asked about me, but in a respectful way, and mentioned he was moving to Pittsburgh for a fresh start. I thanked her for the info but didn't think much of it. Kenny moving away seemed like the best outcome for everyone, which is why I was completely thrown when I opened my apartment door last week, and found him standing there, holding a small gift bag. My first instinct was to slam the door in his face, but he looked so different. Clean-cut, healthier, wearing clothes that actually fit. He held up his hands immediately, like he could sense my panic, and said he wasn't staying, that he was on his way out of town and just wanted to drop something off. I reluctantly took the bag. Inside was a small box and an envelope. The envelope contained $1,500. The box contained a ring, the one he'd bought for Daria with my money, the one I'd seen in that Instagram post that started this whole nightmare. He explained that when Daria left him, she'd thrown the ring at him. He'd kept it, initially planning to pawn it, but never got around to it. He wasn't giving it to me as some weird romantic gesture. He was returning something that was technically mine since I'd paid for it, and he wanted me to decide what to do with it. Keep it, sell it, throw it in the river. Kenny said he had a job lined up in Pittsburgh, that he'd continue sending payments until he'd repaid everything he owed me, that he was genuinely sorry for everything, especially for the cruel things he'd said when I confronted him about Daria. He said I deserved so much better and hoped I'd found it or would find it soon. And then he left. Just a simple wave and he was gone. I took the ring to a jeweler the next day. It wasn't worth nearly what Kenny had paid for it. The stone was smaller than it appeared in photos, and the setting was mass-produced. I got just under $1,000 for it, which went straight into my savings account. So that's it. That's the end of the Kenny saga. I'm doing okay now. The medical office gave me a small raise last month. Rosalie did move in with her boyfriend, but I found a new roommate through a colleague, a quiet grad student who pays on time and doesn't steal my food from the fridge. My back still acts up sometimes on rainy days, a souvenir from my warehouse days. My credit score is still recovering. I still occasionally catch myself checking the locks twice before bed. But I'm building something new, something stable. I don't know if Kenny will actually stick with his new path. People can change, but it's rare and usually happens in small, incremental ways, rather than dramatic transformations. Maybe he'll follow through on repaying me. Maybe he won't. I've learned not to build my plans around other people's promises.